Hi, I'm Anna. Been crunching numbers as an accountant for the better part of a decade now. My husband, John, works in IT, a real tech wizard, which comes in handy more often than you'd think. We've got 2 kids, Lucas and Lily, a pair of energetic sprouts who keep our lives colorful and, honestly, a bit chaotic. We've just moved into our new house, a dream I've had since the kids were born. You see, John and I decided early on that we wanted a proper home for the kids to grow up in, not just any place would do. So, we scrimped and saved, and finally, after years of both of us grinding away, we managed to buy our own place. The house wasn't just a building, it was a promise we made to each other and to our kids. The day we moved in, I remember standing in the empty living room before the furniture arrived, envisioning the memories we'd create. John wrapped his arms around me from behind and whispered, "We did it, babe. We're home." "Yeah, we did it," I replied, my voice a mix of exhaustion and elation. "Let's just hope we survive the decorating part without killing each other." We spent that evening sorting through boxes, assembling furniture, and laying down rules for the kids, simple stuff, like no markers on the walls and no cookies in bed. It was late when we finally crashed, the sound of the kids even breathing from the next rooms, the best kind of lullaby. Things were good. Settling in took less time than I thought, mostly because I decided to work from home. My boss, bless his heart, was more supportive than I'd hoped. He let me handle the company's accounts remotely, as long as I kept up my numbers, and I always do. It wasn't more than a couple of months after the move that we got a surprise. I was in the kitchen, trying to figure out if the coffee maker was just complicated or if I was caffeine deprived, when I heard a knock at the door. Wiping my hands on my jeans, I opened the door and there stood Susan, John's mom. My mother-in-law had that look about her, the kind that said she was up to something but you wouldn't figure it out until it was too late. "Susan, this is a surprise. What brings you here?" I managed to keep my voice steady, but internally, I was already bracing myself. "Oh, Anna, darling, I just missed my grandkids so much. And you know, I've always dreamed of living in a big house like this," she said, her eyes darting around, already making herself at home without an invitation. John came down the stairs, having heard his mother's voice. "Mom, you should have called. We would have picked you up." "Nonsense, I wanted to surprise you. Besides, it's time I spent some quality time with my grandkids," Susan declared, planting a loud kiss on John's cheek. I glanced at John, trying to gauge his reaction. He shrugged slightly, a silent message that read, "What can we do?" It had been a week since Susan plunked herself in our living room. Every morning, I'd tiptoe past her makeshift bedroom to the kitchen, the tension as thick as the burnt toast I'd toss in the trash before anyone could smell it. The whole arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but with each passing day, the discomfort burrowed deeper into our home life. That Tuesday, I had to scoot out early for a rare in-person meeting at work, which meant slipping on real shoes and trading my sweatpants for slacks. As I was leaving, Susan was just a silhouette under the blankets on the couch. I whispered a goodbye to the kids and left before the sun was fully up. When I returned, the house was eerily quiet. I called out, "Lucas? Lily," expecting to hear them thundering down the stairs. Instead, Susan appeared at the bottom of the staircase, her smile wide like she'd won the lottery. "Anna, dear, come see what I've done upstairs." A little surprise for everyone. Her enthusiasm grated on my nerves, but I followed, my curiosity piqued despite my apprehension. As we reached the top of the stairs, the first thing I noticed was the stark emptiness of Lucas's room. My heart sank. Where all his superhero posters had been, now hung drab curtains and pictures of landscapes that screamed boring adult lives here. "What the hell, Susan?" The words flew out of my mouth before I could catch them. She flung her arms wide, as if presenting on a game show. I moved Lucas into Lily's room. "They're young, they can share, can't they? And look, I brought up some of my things to make it more comfortable for me." I stormed into Lily's room, now cluttered with 2 sets of everything, and my kids sitting on the bed looking miserable. Lucas's eyes were red, and Lily's lip quivered. "Mom, why do we have to share now? We had our own rooms, Lucas complained, his voice cracking. I know, honey. I didn't know about this, I said, my voice soft but seething inside as I turned to face Susan. I sold my house to be closer to you all. I have nowhere else to go, she declared, a triumphant look in her eye. I felt the room spin a bit. You what? John didn't tell me that. Well, he knows now. And this is my room now. End of discussion, she said, walking into Lucas's old room and shutting the door with a definitive thud. I gathered the kids and went downstairs, my mind racing. When John got home, I was waiting for him, the kids eating their dinner quietly, the tension thick. John, we need to talk. Now, I said, pulling him aside as soon as he walked through the door. Your mother's moved into Lucas's room. Moved the kids into the same room without asking us. And she told me she sold her house. He ran his hands through his hair, looking as shocked as I felt. She sold her house? She didn't tell me that. This is crazy. I'll talk to her. That night, after the kids were in bed and the house was quiet, John knocked on his mother's door, trying to talk some sense into her. The muffled voices went back and forth, his tone pleading, hers defiant. I sat on our bed, thinking about how our dream home had quickly turned into a battleground. John came back an hour later, looking defeated. She won't budge. Says this is her right. I'm sorry, Anna. I don't know what to do. Every day was a new adventure and patience. I had set up my office in the corner of our bedroom, the only spot I could claim as somewhat quiet for my work calls. My job as an accountant wasn't something you could pause and play at your convenience, but try explaining that to Susan. This particular Thursday, I was deep into reconciling some accounts, my laptop spread with spreadsheets and reports, when Susan barged in, a bag of shopping swinging from her arm. Anna, you spend all day on that thing. Don't you ever take a break? She chided, not caring that I was mid-call with a client. Susan, I'm on a call, I hissed, covering the microphone with my hand, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. Oh, it sounds more like you're chatting with a girlfriend. She chuckled and shrugged, setting down her shopping on the table, spreading her latest treasures across my work area. I muted the call, my heart pounding. Susan, I need this space to be clear. I'm working. Working? Looks more like you're just fiddling on the computer. Back in my day, work meant getting your hands dirty, she scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. Unwilling to argue further, I unmuted the call and tried to focus, but my concentration had shattered. As I wrapped up the call, Susan had already floated away, probably to stow her new haul of discount buys, useless figurines and out-of-fashion clothes that seemed to multiply each day. Later that afternoon, the sound of crying broke my concentration again. It was Lucas, sobbing over something in the living room. Dropping everything, I rushed to him, finding him holding an empty comic book sleeve. Mom, my Spider-Man comics are gone. I left them right here. My heart sank. Let's go ask Susan, sweetie. Maybe she moved them. We found Susan in her room, the door ajar, surrounded by piles of her shopping conquests. Susan, did you see Lucas's comics? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She glanced up, her nose wrinkling in disgust. Those old things? I threw them out. They were cluttering up the living room, and I can't stand spiders. Creepy, crawling things. No need for that nonsense in the house. Lucas's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. But Grandma, they were my favorite. Spider-Man isn't real. He doesn't crawl. I don't care. I don't like them, and they're gone, Susan snapped, turning back to her clutter. As Lucas calmed down, I stepped into the hallway, my mind racing. Susan's disregard for what wasn't hers was growing unbearable. Every inch of space was slowly being consumed by her belongings, her rules, her presence. From the crack of dawn to the hush of night, Susan's presence was like a cloud, casting a shadow over our family's daily life. And with each passing day, her comments and criticisms grew sharper, cutting into the fabric of our routine and comfort. It was a Tuesday morning, and I had just finished getting the kids ready for school when Susan decided to comment on my appearance. "Anna, when was the last time you had a manicure? You really should try to keep yourself up, you know." I glanced down at my hands, nails chipped from household chores, and typing furiously on my laptop. "I've been busy, Susan. You know, taking care of the kids and working from home." She said, shaking her head. "A little effort wouldn't hurt. John would appreciate it." Ignoring the sting of her words, I went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. But as soon as I served the eggs and toast, Susan was on to her next critique. "Is this how you usually cook? It's a bit bland, dear. You really should take some cooking lessons." The kids ate silently, casting me worried glances. I forced a smile, trying to keep the morning from souring further. Later that day, when the kids came home from school, their laughter and lively chatter filled the house. It was a sound I cherished, one that Susan apparently found annoying. "Kids, could you keep it down? I'm trying to watch my shows," she called out from the living room, her tone sharp and commanding. The kids shuffled away, and I felt my frustration mounting. Not wanting to argue in front of them, I retreated to the kitchen, only to overhear Susan mumbling about the noise. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, Susan decided it was time to lecture me on my role in the family. "Anna, I think it's time we start dinner with a little thank you to John. After all, he's the one providing for all of us." I clenched my jaw, setting down my fork. "Actually, Susan, I pay the mortgage. That's $2,800 a month from my salary." Susan waved her hand dismissively as John chimed in. "Mom, Anna's right. She's the one handling the mortgage. I take care of other expenses, but we both contribute equally." "Oh, please," Susan scoffed. "If it weren't for my son, you wouldn't have this house or your comforts." John's face tightened, and he looked like he was about to argue further, but he caught my eye and let out a sigh. We had been through this conversation too many times already. The meal passed with an uncomfortable silence, the clinking of cutlery punctuating the tension. After clearing the dishes, I found myself in the laundry room, folding clothes more aggressively than necessary. John came in, his expression weary. "Anna, I'm sorry about my mom. I don't know what to do to make her understand." I folded a shirt and stacked it with a little too much force. "I don't know either, John. But we can't go on like this. It's like walking on eggshells in our own home." "We'll figure something out," John said, though the assurance sounded hollow. "Maybe we can sit her down and talk it through again. Lay out everything clearly." I nodded, though doubt nagged at me. Susan had made up her mind about how things should be, and it seemed no amount of talking would change her view. This morning started just like any other Tuesday, with me dropping the kids off at school before heading back to the house. I was prepping for an important online conference with my boss and a couple of key executives from the company, a meeting that could significantly impact my career. However, the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was off. The house was bustling with noise, laughter, and the clinking of dishes. Susan had invited her friends over for an impromptu breakfast gathering, apparently turning our living room into her personal social club. I sighed, rubbing my temples as I poured myself a quick cup of coffee. Trying to stay calm, I headed to my office, hoping to find some sanctuary. As I settled down, adjusting my webcam and reviewing my notes one last time, I could hear the muffled chatter and laughter from the living room. I tried my best to block it out, focusing on the upcoming discussion. But just as the meeting started and I began to explain the quarterly projections, the door to my office flew open. Susan, leading her troop of friends, burst in loudly asking, "Anna, why didn't you make us some coffee too? And where's our breakfast? You can't just ignore your guests." Stunned, I muted my microphone, my cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Susan, I'm in the middle of a work meeting. Can this wait?" I hissed, trying to keep my voice low and calm. "No, it can't. You think because you're working, you can neglect your duties as a hostess?" Susan retorted, her voice rising with every word. Frustrated, I pointed at her sharply. keep it down, I'm working." In response, Susan's expression twisted into one of defiance, and in a dramatic gesture, she grabbed my laptop and threw it onto the floor. The screen went black, the sound of my boss's voice cut off abruptly as the machine hit the carpet with a thud. "Go and make us breakfast," she demanded, as if she had every right. Without a word, I stood up, walked over to her, and firmly guided her out of the office, closing the door behind her. My heart was racing, a mixture of anger and shock numbing my senses. I picked up my broken laptop, feeling the sting of tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but from sheer frustration. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my phone and dialed my boss, explaining what had just happened. To my relief, he was more understanding than I expected. "I get it, Anna. Family situations can be tough. Just see if you can sort it out, okay? We need you focused." After hanging up, I could hear Susan in the living room, loudly proclaiming to her audience, "You have to teach these young ones how to behave. If you let them, they'll walk all over you. It's our duty to put them in their place." The audacity of her words made my blood boil, but I knew I had to hold it together. Later that evening, when John came home, I told him everything. His face darkened with each word I spoke. "He did what? That's it. She's paying for a new laptop," he said, his jaw set in anger. "This has gone far enough, Anna. I'm sorry. I'll handle it." He confronted his mother about the incident. Susan, perhaps realizing she had crossed a line, suddenly clutched at her chest, her face contorted in pain. "I'm not feeling well," she gasped, her voice shaky. "Mom, are you okay?" John's tone shifted from anger to concern in a heartbeat. "I need to lie down. This is too much for me," Susan said dramatically, before retreating to her room and locking herself in. The next morning, Susan declared she'd be retreating to a boarding house to restore her health, and I watched her pack with a practiced calm, masking the storm of thoughts whirling in my head. Her sudden declaration of illness, miraculously timed to avoid the fallout from breaking my laptop, seemed too convenient. John, equally skeptical, tried once more to broach the topic of the broken laptop, but she dodged his concerns with an airy wave, promising to discuss it later. As her taxi disappeared down the driveway, John turned to me, a mixture of relief and resolve on his face. "Okay, what's the plan?" he asked, as we stood in the quiet aftermath of her departure. "You know how your mom freaked out over Lucas's Spider-Man comics because she hates spiders?" I began, watching his reaction closely. John's eyebrows rose, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, she can't stand them. Why?" "Let's just say, what if we took that fear and decorated the house with it? Not just any decorations, but make it look like a spider den," I suggested, the words out before I could reconsider. John chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief, before giving a firm nod. "Let's do it. It might just be crazy enough to work. And hey, Lucas will get a kick out of it." Feeling a mixture of excitement and guilt, I called a local artist known for their theatrical set designs. I explained our needs: realistic, lifelike spiders painted on the walls, cobwebs that looked like they were spun by giant arachnids, and an overall ambience that screamed spider den. The artist was intrigued and slightly amused by the project, promising to start the next day. John and I stood back, watching the children and the changing decor. "You think she'll ever want to come back after this?" he asked, a twinge of uncertainty in his voice. I shrugged, watching a painter add the finishing touches to a particularly grotesque arachnid above the fireplace. "I don't know. But I hope it makes her think twice about how she treats this place, our home." As the day of Susan's return neared, the house looked less like the family home it had been and more like a set from a horror movie. I had mixed feelings as I surveyed the work. It was beautifully horrifying and served a purpose, but part of me felt guilty about using Susan's phobia against her. The morning Susan was due back, tension buzzed through the house like electricity. John and I exchanged nervous glances as we heard her taxi pull up outside. Susan breezed into the house, her usual air of entitlement surrounding her like a cloak. She didn't even glance around at the transformed decor, fixated only on retreating to her room for some rest after her exhausting retreat. As soon as she opened the door to her room, though, her composure shattered. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the house as she stumbled back, her hands clutching at her chest. "What is this? What have you done?" The walls, covered in the eeriest, most lifelike spiders and webs, seemed to close in on her. She bolted from the room, her eyes wide with terror, only to find that the rest of the house matched her room. Spiders in every corner, on every wall, our home had become a den of fear for her. Susan ran down the hallway, screaming, "Remove this! Remove this at once!" Calmly, I stepped into her path, my voice steady. "Susan, this is our house, and we decide how to decorate it. We like it this way." John joined me, adding, "We can't afford any changes right now, not after what happened because of you." Her face went pale, her eyes darting around as if the spiders might jump off the walls. "What are you talking about? What happened?" "Your little stunt with Anna's laptop got her fired. We're tight on money now. If you're going to stay, you'll need to contribute $2,800 a month for the mortgage," John lied smoothly, "the fabrication necessary to press our advantage." Susan gasped, clutching her heart again. "This is outrageous. You can't do this to me. I'm leaving. No one appreciates anything I do. I'm not staying in this horror house." As she scrambled to pack her things, I blocked her way at the door. "Before you leave, you owe us $2,000 for the laptop you broke." The color drained from her face, replaced by a flush of anger. She yanked her checkbook from her purse and scribbled furiously. Slamming the check into my hand, she lifted her chin proudly. "There. Now, I'm leaving for good." John and I watched as she hauled her suitcase out the door, her head high, but her shoulders tense. As the door closed behind her, the tension in the air dissolved, replaced by a collective sigh of relief. We turned to each other, John wrapping his arms around me, both of us laughing, a bit from relief, more from disbelief at how things had turned out. "We did it, Anna. It's over." Lucas and Lily came bounding over, their faces bright with smiles. "Is Grandma really gone?" Lucas asked, his voice a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "She's gone, buddy," John confirmed, ruffling his son's hair. "The house is ours again. We can keep the spiders, right?" Lily asked, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "We'll see, honey," I laughed, kissing her forehead. "We'll see." That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, their rooms finally free of Susan's overbearing presence, I felt a peace settle over me. We had our home back, our lives back, and while the method was unconventional, the result was all that mattered. I continued working from home as an accountant, still seated at my trusty desk by the window, overlooking the garden where the kids played. Of course, I hadn't really lost my job, that had been a fib to push Susan to take some responsibility, and thankfully, it worked. Life without Susan was less dramatic. Lucas dove deeper into his comic books, often sprawled across his spider-webbed floor, sketching his own superheroes. Lily had taken to gardening, her little patch outside blooming under her careful attention, a stark contrast to the faux arachnid menace indoors. As for Susan, last we heard, she'd moved into a nursing home. Not surprisingly, rumors filtered back to us through the grapevine, she was up to her old tricks, bickering with the administration and quarreling with other residents. Some people never change, I mused aloud after a call from a relative who had visited her. John shook his head, a wry smile on his face. "Let's just be glad she's spinning her web somewhere else." And true enough, life had become simpler without her daily dramas. We repaired relationships with friends and neighbors, some of whom Susan had alienated with her nosiness and complaints. Invitations started coming back in for backyard barbecues and birthday parties, social gatherings we had avoided during Susan's tenure in our home. One day, as I was setting up for a video conference call with a client, I caught sight of Lucas and Lily outside, laughing as they chased each other around the garden, ducking under sheets hung out to dry. The normalcy of it filled me with a profound sense of contentment. I never realized how much tension there was until it was gone, I told John later that evening. He nodded, wrapping an arm around me. We did what we had to do, Anna. For our family. Our home was our sanctuary once more, the kids were happier, and John and I had found our way back to each other after all the strain. The spiders on the walls served as a reminder of what we had overcome, a quirky symbol of our family's resilience.